not to mention combos like Thopter Foundry and Sword of the Meek.
Curtis Frazier, I believe, will probably bring in 4 Leyline of the Void to break apart the combo that his opponent has. That Thopter Foundry Sword of the Meek combo does go to the graveyard and require the graveyard to work, so a Leyline of the Void will take care of that. Another interesting possibility, he might even bring in an Engineered Plague. Now the thing about those kinds of plans, Engineered Plague, naming, I want to say Spirits? I don't know what the Thopter Foundry, actually they might be Thopters. That's another way to possibly fight that combo, but the thing about it is, it doesn't change the fact that he has very few ways to kill his opponent, and Chris Anderson could just ignore that whole plan and use a Tezzeret on turn 2 or a Jace on turn, a Tezzeret on turn 3 or a Jace on turn 3 and just ride it to victory.
Well, that's the thing. Curtis is mono black, and mono black typically doesn't have effective ways to deal with Planeswalkers. He does have 2 copies of Pie of Needles, which will surely come in, but beyond that, he doesn't really have the cards that you need to contend with Planeswalkers. He's not an aggressive deck, and he doesn't have any permission. So he's going to be under a lot of pressure because he doesn't have Thoughtseize in his deck. He has 4 copies of Inquisition of Kozilek, which can't actually hit any of the Planeswalkers in Chris's deck. On Chris's side, he's got one copy of Notion Thief.
I was going to bring that up.
Card.
Dragon Maze card, Notion Thief.
He's got 1 copy of Meekstone, which isn't coming in. 1 copy of Grafdigger's Cage. I doubt that's coming in. 2 Perish. 2 Ensnaring Bridge, 2 Damnation. The cards that I do see him possibly bringing in, though, are he's got 2 copies of Duress. He's got 2 copies of Vendilion Clique, which is an additional threat. Also some Hand Disruption, which I could see coming in. He also has 1 copy of Trinisphere, which I think actually would be pretty good against Curtis's deck because Curtis is very low casting cost deck. Tries to run on very few mana because of the Smallpox. So a card like Trinisphere can really be very disruptive to Curtis's strategy.
One of the things that's exciting about that Notion Thief, not for this matchup, but I know that when the set was being spoiled, I got a phone call from one of the Legacy players I know, and he was asking me, so exactly how does Notion Thief interact with Jace the Mind Sculptor? And the interaction is pretty awesome. If your opponent activates a Jace the Mind Sculptor for the, quote, Brainstorm ability, you're the one that gets to draw the 3 cards with the Notion Thief, and they're still having to put 2 cards back.
Yeah. And that also works for the regular card Brainstorm as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So, pretty interesting card there. Not sure if it's worthy of 4 slots in your sideboard, or maybe even 3, but I think 1, it looks like Chris is just saying, I kind of want to try it out. Maybe I can get pretty lucky here.
And what happens if you ever do that? I bet you win the game.
I would, yeah. I would say if you draw 3 cards and your opponent just has to put 2 back on top of his library, you're in decent shape. And you have a 3-1. You have a 3-1 beater to boot.
I don't know. We'll see if it ever happens. I would actually really love to see that happen. That sounds exciting to me. But now it's interesting, though. Curtis Frazier's deck with the Chains of Mephistopheles. Chains of Mephistopheles is intended to do exactly the same style of thing. Punish you for trying to be greedy with card drawing effects like Ponder, Brainstorm, Jace. Like a Ponder, it's not very effective against since you're only, quote, drawing 1 extra card for the Chains of Mephistopheles. But it's still pretty solid to turn a Ponder into essentially a weak index.
Yeah, we saw recently we saw a lot of those Jund decks playing Chains of Mephistopheles as a way against those blue decks. So it's not surprising to see it here in the mono black deck. Although, looking at Chris's deck, I think he's in pretty good shape for this matchup because he has 22 lands along to go with those 6 Signets. So he's got 28 mana sources, which is very good against Curtis' mana denial strategy. And not only that, but even if Curtis is able to attack Chris's hand with Lilianas and discard, there's so many powerful cards in Chris's deck that he could just top deck that I think he's still going to be in good shape. And we saw that in the first game, despite Curtis's aggressive start, and he was attacking both Chris's mana and his hand, Chris was able to eventually draw out of it because it doesn't matter how much pressure you're putting on your opponent's resources. If you're not putting pressure on their life as well, then they're going to eventually be able to draw out of it.
That's exactly what I was about to add in. I mean, I'm surprised in a certain sense that Curtis Frazier isn't running a Juzam Jin in this deck. It looks like a Juzam Jin deck to me. And, I mean...
You're going real old school.
Well, I mean, look at the rest of the deck. It looks like yes, he's got a Pox deck. But, I mean, this looks like when you see Dark Ritual, Sinkhole, Hymn to Torok, Nethervoid, that sounds like a Juzam would be in there. I mean, That's just what it looks like.
Or Negator. Let's get Negator in there.
Yeah, there we go.
In the sideboard, at least. He has 4 Dark Rituals. We get some pressure on real quick.
This is one of the flaws of a deck like, I think, Curtis. Just, if you have your opponent disrupted into oblivion, you better do something while they're on the ropes.
Well, it was the same reason I always hated rock decks in either Modern or Extended, because, you know, they play cards like Cabal Therapy, Duress, they try to attack your hand, but then they try to beat you with the Yavimaya Elder. And, you know, it's just too slow of a clock. Your opponent, if they have a lot of powerful spells, which they should, they generally, any deck is going to have more powerful spells than a rock deck, because rock is generally, you know, a very straightforward deck, a lot of discard and a lot of utility creatures. If you're going to be playing against decks like blue decks, usually they're going to have more powerful cards than you. So you give them enough time, they're going to eventually draw out of it. And you get to the mid-late game, those Duresses that you top deck are suddenly much worse. So that's kind of what we saw game 1. We'll see if it happens in game 2 as well. But Chris is going to be under a lot of pressure because it looks like he's mulliganing now to 5 cards.
Ugh, I mean, if there are decks that I don't want to mulligan like that against, somebody that's attacking my land and my hand at the same time, I mean,
yeah,
it's like picking over my carcass.
I would say of the decks I don't want to mulligan against, the one with 4 copies of Smallpox and Liliana the Veil and Inquisition of Kozilek would be at the top of my list.
Yeah.
Not to mention Hymn to Torque, which I don't think we've even mentioned yet.
Yeah, Hymn to Torque is one of those cards that okay, so strange thing, I randomly came across a case of Duelists, the old Duelist magazine from the 90s. And yeah,
a case of Duelist magazines.
Yeah.
Who has a case of Duelist magazines randomly around their apartment?
No, it's not around my apartment. It's from my workplace.
Oh,
I work for a game distribution company. And just looking at it, there was this article from, I want to say, Scath Elias, talking about the creation of Fallen Empires. And they were really excited about how they brought out Fallen Empires.
One of the worst sets ever made.
And
I don't even think I wouldn't even bring up Fallen Empires because there's a chance that WotC might just ban you. You might be banned. You might get an email for bringing up. The bad sets are Arabian Nights, Fallen Empires, and Homelands. You can't mention those sets.
Hymn to Torque, one of the jewels of Fallen Empires.
Yeah. So Chris keeps his hand on 5, and Curtis gets a Thopter Foundry with his turn 1 Inquisition of Kozilek. And he just passes the turn after playing a Mishra's Factory, so...
That's an Antiquities Mishra's Factory here. Curtis is rocking it so old school.
So, again, interesting situation for Chris. He's got the Polluted Delta. He can get an Underground Sea here. He can choose to get an island if he wants to play around Wasteland. Although he does have an Ancient Tomb. And Ancient Tomb can come into play, and he can cast one of the Thopter Foundries in his hand. But, not the Thopter Foundry, Sword of the Meek, rather. But he also has 2 copies of Jace the Mind Sculptor. And between the island and the Ancient Tomb, if he's just able to get 1 more mana, preferably not the 1 swamp in his deck, if he's able to get a Sackland or an Underground Sea or Darkslick Shores, he'll be able to cast that Jace. And once that Jace enters play, it's going to be pretty much very difficult for Curtis to actually come out of that.
1, 2, 3 mana, makes a Ratchet Bomb, and I'm not sure about that's a Ratchet Bomb, right?
Yes, so it looks like he just tapped 2 mana, so he has 1 mana floating. Thankfully, you don't mana burn anymore, so... The Ratchet Bomb comes down. That is a way that he can deal with Pithing Needle, which is one of Curtis's few answers to Planeswalkers, so... it's a pretty good card right now.
Attack for 2, and another land pumped. That's a second Mishra's, so attack for 3, 1 Mishra pumping up the other.
So, unfortunately for Chris, he drew another 4 mana Planeswalker, but he's stuck in those Ancient Tombs. So there is a Pithing Needle in his hand too, in Curtis's hand. So that Ratchet Bomb's gonna do some work later in the game if he ever does get to 4 mana.
Are we gonna see another Void?
I think we might see a Sinkhole here. I think he really wants to get rid of that Ancient Tomb. No, choose to get rid of the island instead. Okay, interesting here. So. And we got a Smallpox. So
now he's got an Urborg in play, which is how he is casting that Smallpox with his Mishra's Factories.
So that's pretty devastating. He gets rid of both of Chris's lands this turn, and he only loses. He decides to sack his Urborg instead of his Swamp, and Chris has to discard one of his Jace the Mind Sculptors, and now he's in really tough position right here. Doesn't have any mana, and he's got 2 4-mana Planeswalkers in his hand. And he's going to be getting his life total chipped away by those Mishra's Factories. So this is you know, similar start by Curtis from the first game, but the difference is he's actually got pressure on the board. So he's actually attacking Chris this game for 3 a turn, which isn't insignificant considering that Chris was forced to take 4 damage from his own Ancient Tombs.
I'm not sure about our life totals here. I think Chris Anderson could possibly be at 13, but I'm not sure about that.
So Pie the Needle looks to probably name Ratchet Bomb. And we have the Engineered Plague, like you mentioned, on, I believe they're Thopters. So yes, Pie the Needle did name Ratchet Bomb, and Engineered Plague is going to name Thopter tokens?
I think it's Thopter.
I think they're Thopters. I'm gonna guess Thopters, but
2 lands in a row there. Chris Anderson potentially 2/3 of the way if he gets an Ancient Tomb or a City of Traders.
Yes, and the Thopter Foundry will no longer be an out for him because the Engineer Plague is currently in play. I don't believe he has an answer to Thopter. Oh, and there is the Thopter Foundry, so a timely Engineered Plague from Curtis. Chris can still play the Thopter Foundry, and he can gain life later in the game if he chooses to. I believe the token... Would the token still trigger the Sword of the Meek? Even though...
It's a 0/0.
It's a 0/0. So, looks like we have a... Curtis gets rid of Chris's Underground Sea here, so... Yep, nothing much Chris can do here. He's forced to scoop it up. Curtis had just too much pressure, and Chris just couldn't come back from that mulligan to 5.
Yeah, and to answer your question about whether the Sword of Meek would come back, the token that comes into play as a 0/0, so it would not trigger the Sword of the Meek. And
again, Curtis had a really good start. He's had 2 games where he had really good starts, but I still think Chris is in reasonable shape. He's on the play this time. As long as he doesn't mulligan to 5, I think his deck has enough power that he can power through that early hate from Curtis.
Absolutely. I mean, he was only one land away from being able to drop a fast Jace or Tezzeret. And if he had had 2 more cards in his hand, he might have been able to do it.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the start Curtis needed, even to beat Chris on a multi 5. Chris multi 5, and Curtis still needed Sinkhole, Smallpox, and 2 of his sideboard cards in order to actually completely shut Chris out of that game. That just kind of goes to show you how powerful Chris's deck is compared to Curtis's deck.
I always have had a soft spot in my heart for these kinds of prison-like Pox decks that, for the most part, just don't let your opponent play. But one of the things that's difficult about them is wrapping up the game. You have to finish it at some point.
Yeah.
And the paths to victory in this deck, Cursed Scroll, Nether Spirit, and Mishra's Factory, they're not exactly speedy.
Yeah, and Curtis was, and that's the other thing that I forgot to mention, he had 2 copies of Mishra's Factory in play to put pressure on Chris, so things kind of went perfectly for Curtis in that game. Let's see if that can happen again in Game 3.
I kind of wonder if Nether Spirit is too archaic and it should maybe be Bloodghast.
Well, I'm surprised he doesn't have Contamination or something like that, because I've seen lists like that run, the Nether Spirit Contamination lock.
Yeah.
Very good against certain decks. It's kind of one of those strategies that it was very popular back in the day in Standard. That
like
Nether
in what,
Nation
2002?
Oh, I think it's further back than that. Maybe maybe 1999 or something. But either way, I'm surprised not to see that. But Nether Spirit, not sure how effective Nether Spirit really is in this kind of format.
I mean, particularly because it's not immune to a Swords to Plowshares, and there's only one of them. And yes, you can try to clear the way by emptying out their hand or having, let's say, a Nether Void out and not having them have enough resources to cast Swords to Plowshares. But what you're really hoping for here is a resilient creature through your Pox. I think Bloodghast does the same kind of work, except for it actually has the ability to be played in a copy of 4 of them, so you can maybe close out a game.
Yeah, I kind of, if I had to choose, I think Bloodghast is probably a little more effective. But, Nether Spirit seems more like one of those archaic cards that maybe you're playing because you just have a soft spot in your heart for it.
I like those cards.
It's, it reminds you of old days where, things were simpler, but, and that's certainly Curtis's deck. Curtis's deck has a lot of old school cards in it.
I think Curtis just tried to do not tried to, this is a joke by the way, but he did reveal his hand when he's mulliganing to his opponent. I think he was trying to go for an all land, maybe a no land mulligan there.
Oh yeah, is that the old school Paris rules? Yeah. Hey, I don't have any lands. Do you mind? For those of you at home, if you ever try that against me, I will not allow that. do not show me your hand of no lands and ask for a free mulligan. I will not oblige you.
Curtis Frazier here on the right with Pox. Chris Anderson on the left with blue-black Tezzeret. He's got 8 4-mana Planeswalkers, 4 Tezzeret, Agent of Bolas, and 4 Jace the Mind Sculptor, and a ton of mana acceleration to get there on turn. Potentially, he could actually drop it on turn 2, it looks like. He could do a 2-mana artifact land, or colorless land like City of Traders or Ancient Tomb, and drop that into a Talisman. And then on the next turn, drop any kind of blue source that's like a land, an island, whatever, Seat of Synod, and have a turn 2 Jace, a turn 2 Tezzeret. Let's see if that happens today. I think it'd be pretty exciting.
I think that's part of the appeal of this deck, is just being able to go turn 2 Jace.
Yep.
You know, the most powerful Planeswalker ever made. It's pretty exciting to be able to do something like that in turn 2.
We go land, and Chris Anderson, not in any way interrupted by Curtis Frazier's plays here, lays a Sword of the Meek.
Oh, wow. And with the Transmute artifact in his hand, he can actually search for the Thopter Foundry next turn, and if he has another artifact, he'll be able to sack it and get that combo going.
Ooh, Ritual, Sinkhole. What else?
And there's
Sinkhole!
Oh my goodness, jeez.
I mean, Curtis is down 1 card for that exchange.
Hammer, don't hurt him. That's unbelievable.
That's an old school one.
So, there's a Dimir Signet. So, Chris right up back on top of things with City of Traders Dimir Signet here. And he'll still be able to go transmute for that Thopter Foundry next turn if he chooses to. But looks like he's going for the Underground Sea instead. A little risky here, not sure, because you kind of want that Dimir Signet in play in case he has another Wasteland, in case he has a Wasteland. But no, decides to play it safe.
In Curtis Frazier's hand is a Tabernacle of Pendrell, which seems like an incredible answer to the Sword of the Meek Thopter Foundry combo.
And here's a Smallpox. So I think Ensnaring Bridge is probably going to go away, and Chris does lose that Underground Sea.
Dark Ritual dropped by Curtis Frazier. Curtis here, once again, going down cards in order to disrupt Chris. He went 3 cards to get rid of 2 land for Chris, and now he loses 2 cards to... he loses 3 of his own cards to get rid of 2 cards of Chris's once again.
And that's kind of why I was really hoping Chris led with the City Traders Dimir Signet, because you have to imagine Curtis probably has a land destruction spell, so why not get that Signet in place so you can actually search for your Thopter Foundry this turn.
And but, Curtis lays a Tabernacle of Pendrell, so he cannot cast the Liliana in his hand.
Yes, so we have a Thirst for Knowledge for Chris Anderson. Allows him to draw 3 cards and then discard 2 or discard an artifact. And he draws into the Thopter Foundry along with the Vendilion Clique and a Jace. So let's see what he chooses to discard here. Discards a Transmute artifact. Ooh, wow. That's risky because so he's discarding a Transmute artifact and a Vendilion Clique. So if Curtis draws a Inquisition of Kozilek, he'll be able to get rid of that.
He draws a Urborg, so he can use his Tabernacle for mana. Minor quibble on my side here. This is just one of those things in Legacy. I really like the Graveyard Order to be correct. There should be a Thirst there on top of those other cards. I know that it doesn't matter because Curtis Frazier does not have a Phyrexian Furnace or any other card that cares about the Graveyard Order, but actually in Legacy, you are supposed to keep your Graveyard Order correct.
Yes. So Chris Anderson can now play the Thopter Foundry. He could actually play Jace the Mind Sculptor right here, which I'd expect him to probably do instead.
Oh, Jace. His opponent, empty-handed, no threats in
Fate
play.
Seal. Oh, Liliana Deville. Probably going away. So, Fate Seal with Jace. Curtis draws a Swamp. Let's not say this game's over, but it is not looking good for Curtis right now. Chris draws a Underground Sea. He's able to Fate Seal. He brings out the big dice. So Big Daddy comes into play to Fate Seal Curtis again.
Leyline.
Ooh, Leyline of the Void.
I might just let him have that one. I mean, right now I think I'm going to Jace him to death.
No, let's get rid of that Leyline. Let's get that Thopter. Okay, so Thopter comes down. He has a mana up, so he can sacrifice it. Powder Keg. Ooh, quite the draw. So Powder Keg comes down. That's fine. Chris doesn't really care that much. he'll be able to generate enough tokens that shouldn't be that much of an issue for him. And again, like you said, he'd still be able to win with Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Powder Keg cannot destroy Jace.
No. Powder Keg cannot destroy Planeswalkers. Powder Keg is one of those cards that, it's an old school card. Very similar to Ratchet Bomb, just slightly different. During your upkeep, you get a counter, or you can choose to put a counter on it, as opposed to Ratchet Bomb, where you tap it to put a counter on it. We're going to see another Fate Seal here from Chris.
Feel free to keep a swamp, Curtis.
We're going to attack for 2 probably on this side, and then just pass the turn back. Chris sitting in pretty good shape here. Oh,
Baleful Strix. Let's draw a card. Let's see what else is going on.
All right, so we have a Force of Will drawn.
And Curtis with that useless card on top.
Draws. Looks like it is a swamp. And a couple more turns, and Jace will eventually be able to go ultimate.
I believe there's a Tabernacle in play. And he pays for his 2 creatures.
So he pays for both his creatures. He draws a Darkslick Swords, which can play. And we're going to attack for 3 here.
Not a spin down die, or maybe it is.
Ooh, is that a Curse Scroll? Looks like it's Curse Scroll. Doesn't want him to keep that, so it sends that to the bottom. That can target Jace the Mind Sculptor, so doesn't want that coming into play.
Let's see what Curtis gets. He's got 1 shot right here. Better be a good one.
So let's see. We're going to draw Dark Ritual. Not quite what he was hoping for. Curtis activates Powder Keg. And Chris is going to sacrifice those artifacts to get some tokens. We'll see if he decides to keep all those tokens, because there is a Tabernacle Veil in play, so he's going to have to pay for... He looks like he'd only pay for 3 of them, and he has 3 tokens, so he can tap out here.
Upkeep.
Upkeep.
Decisions.
Tabernacle.
All of them. There we go.
Does he draw a blue card to lock this game up? No, Polluted Delta. So he still has a Force of Will, but he doesn't have a blue card to pitch to it. We're going to Fate Seal 1 more time. It's a Liliana the Veil.
Let him keep it. That does nothing.
Yeah, I mean, really no reason to move that to the bottom. You can kill it with your tokens anyway.
There you go. Chris Anderson comes in for 3.
Comes in for 3. Nothing can stop the Fate Seal now on Chris's side. Liliana comes down. 3 mana, not for a swamp. 3 mana for Liliana the Veil. We're going to uptick it. Chris discards a Force of the Will. And
right now, that's it. Jace
Make sure
Ultimate.
he pays. He pays 3. He draws a card for the turn. He draws another Jace. We're going to go to Ultimate right here.
Let's nuke your deck. Oh, if only.
If only. So, yep. That's all she wrote. And Curtis loses 1-2, and Chris Anderson now moves on to 3-0 with his blue-black Tezzeret Jace deck.
I mean, this kind of matchup, it's kind of, in some ways, like watching a MMA fighter go up against a boxer. You know, you've got this old-school boxer